Previously, Nothorm woke up one morning about 2 weeks after rescuing Zero's master and found Whitestone Castle hustling and bustling around them. Poppy told them that a party had been arranged in their honor, and nobody had told them until just then because no one trusted several of them, by which she mainly meant Ceres, to not just disappear beforehand to avoid said party. She sent them scurrying off to see the royal seamstress, who was in charge of providing them with whatever outfit they wanted to wear. Throughout the day, the group did a variety of little things. For example, Ceres hung out at the local bar and had several awkward talks. Zero and Victoria were officially inducted into the Land of Ravens. Aerith bought some pastries and jewelry, and then she went diving for shells. Arian went to the post office to pick up a delivery of cheese that he'd ordered for Gwei, and then stopped by to have a talk with Salar and ask him to use his wish spell to permanently turn him into a full elf with the associated lifespan so that he and Aerith could live out their lives together. Like I said, little things. Zalor did in fact use his wish spell to do just that for Arian, not losing it in the process, unlike some people. Arian was permanently turned from a half-elf into a full elf, specifically an Eladrin, much to the shock and surprise of his wife, who he didn't tell until afterwards. That night, everyone attended the celebration. There were many familiar faces there. Iridian got to see Gabby and his very small namesake that she'd given birth to a few months earlier. Arian was almost tackle-hugged by Katara, who was very confused to see his new appearance, but shrugged it off as children are wont to do. Gwei got to spend some time with her grandmother. Ceres was coerced into dancing with Poppy for hours and hours. Aerith attempted to teach Zero how to dance, and dance properly, with both Zalor and Gwei. Arian and Iridian got to play their instruments together for the first time in ages. And around then was when Sib came stomping into the room, making a beeline for the alcohol, with the surviving members of Vox Machina trailing behind her. Keyleth thanked Nothrum for everything they'd done and told them that they would always find safe haven with them, their families, and their descendants. Also, Nothrum was going to be paid a stipend for the rest of their lives by the Dorolos. Then Vox Machina disappeared to get some sleep. The party continued into the wee hours of the morning. Around 2 a.m. or so, Poppy led everyone from the palace down to the Sun Tree, where a monument had been set up in Nothrum's honor. The next morning, everyone slept in, and then had, I suppose brunch still works, even if it is technically afternoon by the time you have it. A familiar face showed up, specifically Callie, the halfling rogue who was tested by the Land of Ravens at the same time as several of Nothrum, but who was assigned elsewhere rather than sticking with the group. By which I mean the original character of yours truly, who I played in the initial one-shot that eventually turned into this campaign. As she left, everyone settled in to finish their food and start the rest of their lives. Aerith left. She'd spent her entire life being who other people needed her to be, to the point where she didn't even know who she was. She told Arian that she'd come back eventually if he was willing to wait for her, and then she spent the next 5 years learning just who Aerith was. She spent time in Zephrah learning what it truly meant to be a druid from Keyleth. She visited Marquette and paid homage to Shema. She kept her promise and created a shrine for Zero with input from both him and Victoria. She reconnected with her siblings, and she explored the Feywild with Iridian. She returned to Andorlin to learn more about the Eladrin children there in the hope that she could someday find a way to free them. She traded in her rogue levels for monk ones. The way of mercy. And eventually she came home to the house that Arian sacrificed his wish spell to create for her, where he was waiting. He'd spent the years helping at Gilmore's and setting up a permanent teleportation circle in their home so that Nothrum could always find them. They had 3 children, Violet Lily, the sorcerer druid, and the twins, Estelle Juniper and Zephyr Rowan. Their home became a shelter for anyone in the Land of Ravens who needed a safe place to stay. Arian trained both Katara and Richard, who eventually got married, and the 2 of them had centuries of being elves together. Zero traded in his levels in Barbarian for ones in Artificer. Victoria stayed with him, teaching him everything she could. Sarah spent a year or so cleaning up loose ends and essentially trying to get her head on straight. She visited her parents for the first time in decades and got to know her younger sibling better than she had in the handful of days they'd spent together previously. She and Poppy settled into a complicated relationship that nevertheless worked for them, and eventually she found herself in a leadership role in the Land of Ravens. Zallar created a magical fortress that everyone in Nothrum had access to, a permanent home that would always be waiting for any and all of them. He opened a store called Stonekeepers, giving himself a new name for his new life. Also, he may have potentially have made himself immortal, as you do. After reconnecting with Aerith and traveling with her in the Feywild, Iridian returned home and cast Temple of the Gods daily for a year to make it permanent. He turned it into an orphanage and a place of safety for those in need. He found out the identity of his biological father. And at one point, he also visited Marquette to essentially tell Jamon Ward that what they did with Shema, the way she was raised, was fucked up, so maybe they should stop doing that. Gwei went home to visit her family. Gran lived for another 8 years, and Gwei stayed there until she passed. Once she did, Gwei was barely into her 30s and had her entire life in front of her. Years passed. Time continued to move forward. Slowly, the world changed. Leaders changed. Everyone's lives became a little different. Despite all that, there was something special about the family they made of Nothrum. And that is where we left off for the last time.